because it's amazing. It's amazing how fast I can forget. It's just getting scary. All right, so here we are. We're actually getting really close to finishing this book. We can probably do it in 2 more weeks, I'm thinking, because some of these passages, there's not a lot of commentary that needs, they're kind of self-explanatory. So we'll see. But we have some extra reading to do after that. And tonight we're going to jump into a little bit of Merton. But even after we finish the book, I want to take a session or two just to read some of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. And so we'll do that together. So I'll get some of those sayings together, and either we'll read them off the screen or I'll try to get you a text out. So that'll extend our study a little bit more. But right now we're on page 80, starting a new section, prayer and ministry. So we ended up with the last section, and that was the prayer of the heart, right? And where we left it is that all of that discussion about the differences between prayer of the mind and prayer of the heart raises the question of how to practice the prayer of the heart in a very restless ministry. And it's to this question of discipline, the D word, that we must now turn our attention. So we're talking about how, from his point of view, and remember, this is to ministers, but we're using ministry in its broadest sense, just in terms of our interaction with each other, leaving people better than we found them, that sort of thing. Having the awareness to be present enough to be able to make the decisions that will leave people better than they found them, and not just knee-jerk reactions from our own triggers and egoic talking to ourselves. But now he's going to go through and he's going to break this into 3 sections as well. And we'll go through these. And so this is his way of creating a structure. And this is critical. If you're going to be a contemplative, and remember the difference between a contemplative and a mystic, we talked about this a while back. The mystic is the one who lives in a state of oneness and connection, can see through the diversity and the apparent separation and individual form and function of life to the oneness beyond. Contemplatives are the ones that are doing the process of getting there to mystic status. So contemplation is the process by which we can have a mystical experience and eventually become characterized by seeing life through that mystical lens. So and the only way that you can practice contemplation is through some sort of structure, because it takes time. It's not something that just happens. It's something that you do over and over again until it becomes a part of you. And that's the way he's going to characterize this prayer. And it's the way that the contemplatives are characterized. So there has to be some sort of structure. So he's creating a 3-part structure here that helps ministers especially, but all of us, to be able to have a blueprint, have a plan, have a way toward being able to cultivate this prayer of the heart. And the key to prayer of the heart is that you have to begin by saying it, but eventually the prayer says you. That's the whole idea, that eventually it just becomes part of who we are in a very Brother Lawrence kind of way. And then it's just us living our lives, but in and from a new point of view. All right. Let's go ahead and start. Frank, go ahead and take us down page 80.
Okay, do you want to start at the top?
At the very top, read even the title.
Okay. Prayer and ministry.
Thank you.
How can we, who are not monks and do not live in the desert, practice the prayer of the heart? How does the prayer of the heart affect our daily ministry? The answer to these questions lies in the formulation of a definite discipline, a rule of prayer. There are 3 characteristics of the prayer of the heart that can help us to formulate this discipline. The prayer of the heart is nurtured by short, simple prayers. The prayer of the heart is unceasing. The prayer of the heart is all-inclusive.
Okay, so that's our framework. He's going to have a short few pages on each one of these 3 to develop them further. But this is the framework. This is the structure. This is the plan. And every one of these is going to be counterintuitive, countercultural to the way that we normally think in modern Western religious practice. So it's going to be challenging at the same time. Was that a question, Becky, or you were just really intently listening? Okay, that's beautiful. All right, continue on, Frank.
Nurtured by short prayers. In the context of our verbose culture, it is significant to hear the Desert Fathers discouraging us from using too many words. Abba Macarius was asked, "How should one pray?" The old man said, "There is no need at all to make long discourses. It is enough to stretch out one's hand and say, 'Lord, as you will, and as you know, have mercy.' And if the conflict grows fiercer, say, 'Lord, help.' He knows very well what we need, and he shows us his mercy." John Climacus is even more explicit. "When you pray, do not try to express yourself in fancy words, for often it is the simple, repetitious phrases of a little child that our Father in heaven finds the most irresistible. Do not strive for verbosity, lest your mind be distracted from devotion by a search for words. One phrase on the lips of the tax collector was enough to win God's mercy. One humble request made with faith was enough to save the good thief. Wordiness in prayer often subjects the mind to fantasy and dissipation. Single words of their very nature tend to concentrate the mind. When you find satisfaction or compunction in a certain word of your prayer, stop at that point."
Wow. What if we actually did that? Yeah, you're praying along and saying these prayers, and you just hit that point where it just feels like it's done, and then you actually stopped right in the middle of the sentence. I love that. When you find satisfaction or compunction in a certain word of your prayer, stop at that point. It's done. We don't need any more. How many of you know what compunction means? So if we get to the point of satisfaction or compunction, compunction would be remorse that is felt, maybe even guilt, but more pertinent to us, it would be the motivation for change. The motivation for repentance would probably be a better way for us to see that. So as soon as we get to that point where we're satisfied, or at least we have become aware of something that needs to change in our lives for the better, then we can stop at that point. Do you remember what the phrase on the lips of the tax collector was that was enough to win God's mercy? Do you remember that one? Do you remember the story that Jesus tells? He's in the temple and he's watching two people pray. One is a Pharisee and the other is a publican. That would have been a toll tax collector. You know, they sat at the intersections of the trade routes and they collected tolls for the Romans. So they were absolutely hated, of course, by Jews because they were in collaboration with the Romans. And most of them were crooked. You know, they were feathering their own pockets and doing this and that. So they were scum on the bottom of your shoe or your sandal, I guess, at that point. And so you got the Pharisee, who's the one who is held in awe by the people, and then you've got this tax collector there. And the Pharisee is saying, you know, Lord, I thank you that I am not like all this riffraff around here. You know, these sinners, these prostitutes, these this, these that, or like this tax collector over here, you know. And he says, I tithe my 10% and I fast twice a week. And we just talked about this yesterday or Sunday, that the Pharisees and the Jews measured their righteousness in three ways: by their almsgiving, their fasting, and their prayer. That's how they measured their righteousness before God. And so he is a Pharisee's Pharisee, and he's above the law. Meanwhile, the tax collector doesn't even raise his eyes to the altar. He just beats his breast and he says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's all he said. And so Jesus is praising him because he is in that humble state. He's in that anavim state. He's in that place where he just can do nothing except throw himself on God's mercy and be completely dependent on God, because he knows he's not entitled, and anything he gets, he's fully grateful for. So that's that anavim attitude that just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. And do you remember the humble request made with faith from the good thief on the cross? All he said was, Lord, remember me when you come into paradise. That's it. Simple stuff. I love the Macarius up there. Lord, as you will and as you know, have mercy. And if the conflict goes fiercer, Lord, help. He knows very well what we need, and he shows us mercy. Jesus says the same thing. Your Father already knows what you need before you ask him. So don't use a lot of words. You don't need a lot of words. It's really the connection that's there. Now, whatever words that we do use that helps us to cement that connection in that moment, that's great. But as soon as you have the connection, guess what? We can stop. Don't need any more words after that. Just little short prayers. How many? What is your prayer life like now? Do you pray in words a lot, either mentally thinking or praying out loud? Have your prayers gotten shorter, longer? For any of you who have been trying to delve into contemplative practice, has it changed the way that you pray?
I've actually been trying to make my prayers long.
Say that again, William.
I've actually been trying to make my prayers longer.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I typically don't pray at all. And I actually want to start to practice clarifying what I want, or what I'm bringing to God. There's definite value in being able to say things and articulate what's going on. But I really like what the author is saying here. I had an experience where at one of my low points, and I think I might have shared this with you guys before, I remember walking on the beach in Dana Point and just saying the Lord's Prayer over and over and over again. And then narrowing it down to, where my struggle was I wasn't accepting the things that could not change. So I just narrowed the prayer down to, God, help me to accept the things I can't change. And I just kept repeating that until it just came down to God. And I was just saying the first word of that prayer to myself over and over again. And sounds like where the authors might have been going in that direction a little bit there.
Absolutely, you're right on point there. And the prayers become shorthand. There becomes like you said, God became the kind of the sign of intention for the whole thing that you were saying before. And so you didn't need the whole thing anymore because it was already ringing in your system there. But that's perfect. I think that's exactly what we're talking about. Now, what you started with was typical William on the other side of the tracks. Okay, I want to make my prayers longer. I'm not going to make them shorter. So, but if you're not praying at all, I guess the short prayer would still be longer, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's great, though. I love that. Yeah, just that one line from the Serenity Prayer is perfect, because that's it. That's the point of connection. That's the awareness of where you're at and where you need to go. And simple stuff. Anyone else?
My go-to phrase is be still.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard that one, Becky, where you say, be still and know that I am God? Then be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still.
Be still.
Be.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah, that's very cool. So it's a line from the Psalms, but it's really cool how you can just collapse that thing down and then it's just be, But kind of like William taking that line and collapsing it down to God. Everything is contained in there. So that's very cool. Well, I know for me, my prayers have gotten pretty much nonverbal. You know, my prayer time is nonverbal. But if I do say something, it's kind of like that. Lord help. Lord, I really need to feel your presence today. You know, it may be something that simple, and that's it. Like I said, I rarely pray for a specific outcome because it just kind of seems superfluous. I know what I'm looking for, and I know God already knows, and so it's less important to verbalize. It's more important to just feel God's connection for me, to feel the empowerment of being able to do the next indicated step toward that goal, and continue to have the energy and the enthusiasm to and the initiative to keep going in that direction. But yeah, my prayers have gotten very short, but mostly nonverbal. And that's been over all the years.
So, excuse me. So, Dave, do you just try to clear your mind so you're just silent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's kind of like what am I going to think about next? I wonder what I'm going to think about next. Only for me, it's just the sacred word of centering prayer, which is the signal of the intention. When he starts talking more about the prayer of the heart, you're going to see that direct connection to the sacred word of centering prayer. Because what Basil Pennington and Thomas Keating did in the 70s was take this hesychastic prayer, this formula of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and then just updated it into the centering prayer form that we basically use today. And so the sacred word is a distillation of these short phrases and prayers that they would say over and over again. And we don't, centering prayer doesn't use them as an ongoing mantra or of sorts, only as you need to when your thoughts have strayed. So yes, that's what I'm doing, is just to try to sit in that place of choiceless awareness. And when my thoughts go out, and they do, to bring them back with the sacred word, but just try to stay in silence. And an understanding that there's nothing that is happening in the prayer time itself. That's not the point. The point is to exist in that space, to stay in that space of connection, because you end up taking that with you into the day as mindfulness, and that connection stays with you as you go forward. So, and then to practice that all during the day. So I'm trying to create a seamless prayer or unceasing prayer, but just in the sense of awareness that I'm in this moment and I'm connected. It's more like that. But when the going gets tough, then more words are needed, and that's it. There's just some days where I just have to say something. And at the beginning of the centering prayer, usually I'll read something, just a short prayer, like those meditations that I'm doing on Sundays before communion. It's those kinds of prayers. I'll read something like that just to kind of get centered intellectually and then try to move beneath it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, better.
Okay. Yeah.
Doing prayer every single day. And I got to turn more to what you were just talking about that you sent to me. I need to do it every day, and if more.
Okay. Are you talking about centering prayer, Linda?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can. I mean, you're living like a monk in the city. You got your whole space to yourself. You could do it three times a day.
Yeah, I'm gonna work.
Doesn't have to be just once. You can have as much ice cream as you want. Absolutely. Okay, let's read a little more.
There is a very helpful suggestion for us. People who depend so much on verbal ability. The quiet repetition of a single word can help us to descend with the mind into the heart. This repetition has nothing to do with magic. It is not meant to throw a spell on God or to force him into hearing us. On the contrary, a word or sentence repeated frequently can help us to concentrate, to move to the center, to create an inner stillness, and thus to listen to the voice of God. When we simply try to sit silently and wait for God to speak to us, we find ourselves bombarded with endless conflicting thoughts and ideas. But when we use a very simple sentence, such as, "Oh God, come to my assistance," or "Jesus, Master, have mercy on me," or a word such as Lord or Jesus, it is easier to let the many distractions pass by without being misled by them.
Okay, so you hear in what he's saying right now, the seeds of the sacred word of centering prayer, right? Now, what the ancients would do typically is they would take a simple prayer, like the Jesus prayer, Lord have mercy on me, a sinner, and then that was distilled down to Kyrie eleison, in Greek, just Lord have mercy, and they would say it over and over again, hundreds of times a day. And he talks about that a little later on, about how that would transform them. By saying that prayer over and over again, eventually there was a sense that the prayer was saying them, and they got to a point where they didn't need to say it anymore verbally, and they didn't need to think it anymore verbally. That prayer being said over and over again, but like you said, it's not in a superstitious way that they were saying it. They didn't think of it as an incantation. It wasn't anything in terms of a sense of control. There was no control associated with this prayer that they would say over and over again. It was simply to embed it, to take it into, typically what we would call muscle memory, procedural memory, right? It would take it into that place where it just became a part of their being. And every time they would say the prayer, it was like a regrounding in the present moment. It was a call back to mindfulness. And so they ended up in a state of continual mindfulness, but then they didn't need the words anymore. The words were like the training wheel on the bike. Just needed it as long and until we got to the place where you didn't need it anymore. Just like the law, right? What we were talking about with the law, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle will be left unfulfilled from the law. So the law is only needed until it's internalized, and then you don't need it anymore. You don't need to follow rules if the rule of your heart already is going to take you there. You don't need the words of the prayer anymore once it's embedded in your heart and it's written on your heart. So the same idea here. One of the things that I just wanted to clarify when he said, when we simply try to sit silently and wait for God to speak to us, we find ourselves bombarded with endless conflicting thoughts and ideas. But the idea, of course, in contemplative prayer, centering prayer, is we're not waiting for God to speak to us, not in any way that we would understand intellectually. And that's a real key difference. We're not waiting for that. And I remember people telling me, I'm going to pray all night until I get a word from God, and they'd be all bleary-eyed in the morning. And, if they did get a word, how would you know whether it was really from God or just from your own egoic mind? How do you distinguish that? Once it's reduced to words, now it's just another thought in your head. We could say that we know the difference, and maybe we do. But in contemplative prayer, we're not looking for anything intellectual. In fact, we're looking for just the opposite, just to stay silently in that space of choiceless awareness. What comes to us and what happens and the results or the effect of the prayer doesn't happen during the time of prayer. It happens throughout the rest of the day. That's where you start to feel the effects, but not during the prayer itself. And so I just wanted to make that distinction.
So what you've given me, the 29 pages, is that in that
Yes,
set?
yes. If you look at the method of centering prayer, that'll be in there. Okay, that's part of that download.
Okay. So I'll work on that first. Huh?
Yep. Just being silent, but not waiting either for some kind of revelation, not waiting for anything. As soon as you bring an agenda into the prayer, You're cooked before you start.
I understand that.
Yeah, it's agendaless. You're just going to be. Okay.
Yeah, we can't just say, gimme, I want it
Yeah.
this way, because that's not the way it works, right?
That's right. Okay. Go ahead, Frank.
Such a simple, easily repeated prayer can slowly empty out our crowded interior life and create the quiet space where we can dwell with God. It can be like a ladder along which we can descend into the heart and ascend to God. Our choice of words depends on our needs and the circumstances of the moment, but it is best to use words from Scripture.
Well, he thinks so, you know, and that's fine. It's absolutely fine. Remember that the sacred word, it can be absolutely anything. I always remember, you all know Bill Fellers, right? Alpaca Man. He used to, when he was taking hikes and runs, you know, through the hills behind his house, he would stop at a bench and try to do centering prayer kind of halfway through. That would be his time to just kind of stop and go into meditation mode. And he was using a sacred word that was either from Scripture or had some kind of religious connotation to it. I can't remember which one he said it was, but it wasn't working for him. You know, it was just his mind, it was all over the place, and the sacred word would just create more, you know, pings of thoughts all over the place. And he happened to be sitting next to a cactus. And so he used cactus as a sacred word, and he said it worked beautifully. You know, it's kind of like, I wonder what I'm going to think about next. It's interesting how some things can trigger you to go into that space, and other things maybe you're loaded. Whatever word that you do choose, if you're going to choose one, and it can be anything, but what you don't want it to be is emotionally loaded. If it's emotionally loaded with you, then it's going to create more mental activity. So it should be something that you can feel positive about, I suppose. You don't want a negative one, but not one that's going to be loaded in any way. And remember, the sacred word is not significant in itself. It really can be anything. Cactus, you know, it is simply the symbol of your intention to come back to that quiet space. And so it's not significant in itself. It's just that symbol of intention. And so it can be literally anything. But see what works for you. Try different ones and see what works. Also, it doesn't have to be a single word. It could be a phrase. It could be Lord have mercy. It could be Lord help. It could be anything that you want it to be, as long as it allows you, like dropping that rock in the still pond with the dirt on top, the film on top, just allows you to clear that space, you know, and just hold it as long as you can. And as needed, drop the rock in again.
Is it like a meditation, or is it a form of meditation?
It functions the same as meditation, yes. So yeah, you could say it's a form of meditation. Absolutely. Okay. A little bit more, Frank.
This way of simple prayer, when we are faithful to it and practice it at regular times, slowly leads us to an experience of rest and opens us to God's active presence. Moreover, we can take this prayer with us into a very busy day. When, for instance, we have spent 20 minutes in the early morning sitting in the presence of God with the words, "The Lord is my shepherd," they may slowly build a little nest for themselves in our heart and stay there for the rest of our busy day. Even while we are talking, studying, gardening, or building, the prayer can continue in our heart and keep us aware of God's ever-present guidance. The discipline is not directed toward coming to a deeper insight into what it means that God is called our shepherd, but toward coming to the inner experience of God's shepherding action in whatever we think, say, or do.
Okay, so you see what he's saying there? If the Lord is my shepherd is your prayer for the morning, or even if it's your sacred word or phrase that you're using, it's not supposed to take you into a contemplation or a meditation about the meaning of those words or the theological significance of those words. It's nothing like that. That just takes you out. And you're not looking for any kind of revelation along those lines. That's, again, not bringing an agenda into the prayer. It's just, what is the truth of that relationship? That's what we're more looking. What does it feel like to be shepherded by God? What does it feel like to be part of the herd, part of the flock that God is leading unerringly to green pastures, to just have that sense of complete trust, the way the sheep trust the shepherd. They just go where the shepherd goes. They follow, right into the slaughterhouse for that matter. They're just going to follow. But what is it like to just have that kind of trust and that ability to simply follow? So the reality of that is what we're looking to experience, rather than to think more deeply about any sort of significance. So the whole point is to step away from the intellectual. The whole point is to experience life on a different plane. And it's very different than the way that we normally experience life. And it is so radically different that we miss it. We keep trying to bring our prayer back into what is familiar to us, what feels comfortable to us, than to really allow ourselves to go out into something that feels like really nothing. I mean, there's nothing to hang on your hat on. There's nothing to hang on to. There's no edges in contemplative practice. It is allowing yourself to just be out in the field, right? It's a very different feeling, very different experience. And if it doesn't feel different to you, at least at first, then you're probably not really doing it. It's a part of the key. This is at the point I want to read you a little bit, a couple pages from Thomas Merton's book. It's called The Inner Experience. And he's trying to get across this difference that I'm talking about, that all mystics and contemplatives, will write about it at one point or another. And this idea of who the I is, who are we, the egoic mind's obsession with trying to create, its own identity and its own existence, and how stepping away from that really is the point of contemplation. So let me share the screen. All right, are you all seeing the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start about halfway down on page 4, the left-hand page. Okay, so Merton writes, who is this I that you imagine yourself to be? An easy and pragmatic branch of psychological thought will tell you that if you hook up your pronoun with your proper name and declare that you are the bearer of that name, you know who you are. You are aware of yourself as a person. Perhaps there is a beginning of truth in this. It's better to describe yourself with a name that is yours alone than with a noun that applies to a whole species, for then you are evidently aware of yourself as an individual subject and not just an object, or as a nameless unit within a multitude. It is true that for modern man, even to be able to call himself by his own proper name is an achievement that evokes wonder both in himself and in others. But this is only a beginning, and a beginning that primitive man perhaps might have been able to laugh at. For when a person appears to know his own name, it is still no guarantee that he's aware of the name as representing a real person. On the contrary, it might be the name of a fictitious character occupied in a very active self-impersonation of the world of business or politics, of scholarship or of religion. This, however, is not the I who can stand in the presence of God and be aware of him as a thou. For this I, there is perhaps no clear thou at all. Perhaps even other people are merely extensions of the I, reflections of it, modifications of it, aspects of it. Perhaps for this I, there is no clear distinction between itself and other objects. It might find itself immersed in the world of objects and to have lost its own subjectivity, even though it may be very conscious and even aggressively definite, insane I. If such an I one day hears about contemplation, he will perhaps set himself to become a contemplative. That is, he will wish to admire in himself something called contemplation. And in order to see it, he will reflect on his alienated self. He will make contemplative faces at himself like a child in front of a mirror. There's that great line, right? He will cultivate the contemplative look that seems appropriate to him and that he likes to see in himself. And the fact that his busy narcissism is turned within and feeds upon itself in stillness and secret love will make him believe that his experience of himself is an experience of God. But the exterior I, the I of projects, of temporal finalities, the I that manipulates objects in order to take possession of them, is alien from the hidden interior I, who has no projects and seeks to accomplish nothing, even contemplation. You see how radically different that is? I mean, we're always trying to accomplish something. In our prayer, we're trying to accomplish something. The whole point is to accomplish something. And people who are so focused on accomplishing something, they look at contemplation and it just seems like navel gazing. It's just nothing to them. They can't even comprehend the value of it. But this is where we're trying to make this shift, you know? The exterior I, the I of projects, of temporal finalities, the I that manipulates objects in order to take possession of them, is alien from the hidden interior I, that deeper self, who has no projects and seeks to accomplish nothing, even contemplation. He seeks only to be and to move, for he is dynamic, according to the secret laws of being itself, and according to the promptings of a superior freedom that is of God, rather than to plan and achieve according to his own desires. It's a literal blowing about in the wind, allowing yourself to blow about in the wind. And to realize that the wind is taking you like the flock of sheep somewhere that you want to go, but not trying to exert your own influence, agenda, outcomes, planning, at least not during the prayer time itself, of course. It will be ironical indeed if the exterior self seizes upon something within himself and slyly manipulates it as if to take possession of some inner contemplative secret, imagining that this manipulation can somehow lead to the emergence of an inner self. The inner self is precisely that self which cannot be tricked or manipulated by anyone, even by the devil. He is like a very shy wild animal that never appears at all whenever an alien presence is at hand, and comes out only when all is perfectly peaceful, in silence, when he is untroubled and alone. He cannot be lured by anyone or anything because he responds to no lure except that of divine freedom. And so this inner self that he's talking about, you can't manipulate it. You can't make it become what you want it to be. It doesn't respond to any of that. And the more you try, the more you lose it. Sad is the case of that exterior self that imagines himself contemplative and seeks to achieve contemplation as the fruit of planned effort and of spiritual ambition. He will assume varied attitudes, meditate on the inner significance of his own postures, and try to fabricate for himself a contemplative identity. And all the while, there is nobody there. I love that line. There is only an illusory fictional I which seeks itself, struggles to create itself out of nothing, maintained in being by its own compulsion and the prisoner of his private illusion. The call to contemplation is not and cannot be addressed to such an I. Interesting, huh? Oh, couple more paragraphs. Actually, start at the top of page 7 on the right-hand side. This inner self, this I that he's talking about, is as secret as God. And like him, it evades every concept that tries to seize hold of it with full possession. It is a life that cannot be held and studied as object because it is not a thing. It is not reached and coaxed forth from hiding by any process under the sun, including meditation. All that we can do with any spiritual discipline is produce within ourselves something of the silence, the humility, the detachment, the purity of heart, and the indifference, which are required if the inner self is to make some shy, unpredictable manifestation of his presence. At the same time, however, every deeply spiritual experience, whether religious, moral, or even artistic, tends to have in it something of the presence of the interior self. Only from the inner self does any spiritual experience gain depth, reality, and a certain incommunicability. But the depth of ordinary spiritual experience only gives us a derivative sense of the inner self. It reminds us of the forgotten levels of interiority in our spiritual nature and of our helplessness to explore them. Merton's writing is obviously full of paradox, right? There's so much here that is just going back, but this is the way that all of the mystics and the contemplatives read. If you have read John of the Cross, if you've read Meister Eckhart, this is the way they speak. And it's just another reminder that what we're doing in contemplation, what we're doing in this prayer of the heart, is very different than what we do all day long in our egoic mind, conscious minds, and in our intellectual, thought processes. It's gonna feel very different, and it's gonna feel very foreign, or it's just gonna feel like nothing at all. You're just kind of twiddling spiritual thumbs and nothing is happening. But if you just keep showing up to it, if you stick with it, things do happen. But they happen while you're sleeping. Jesus' parable of the growing seed, right? The farmer goes out, does his work, plants, nurtures, waters, and then he goes home and goes to sleep. And everything of real miraculous significance happens while he's sleeping. The same thing is going to happen with contemplative prayer. When you read Jesus over again, after you start to especially experience some of this, then his sayings and his parables make so much sense, but on this deeper contemplative level, because he's trying to get all of us to be able to first break through the biases of our own thought process, to see that there's another there out there that we're not considering, and then to actually take the first steps toward it. Is there anything that you want to comment on this stuff? I know probably on a first reading like that, it's pretty hard to absorb, I would imagine. You have to have it kind of in front of you, and you can spend some time with each paragraph and all that sort of thing.
It's very similar to Emerson's essay on the oversoul. Very, very similar in terms of the separation between the I, or the oversoul, he refers to as the oversoul, and the I versus the ego or the mind.
Mhm.
Very similar kind of writing.
Well, that's Emerson, right? The poet, the mystic. I mean, yeah. William Blake, his stuff goes way over the deep end, right? But it's the same kind of thing. You see the similarity and the sameness to the writing, even with the vast differences between them in terms of style and imagery, but they're all coming from that same place. They've seen that other side, and now they're coming back with the whitened hair, like Moses, and trying to tell us what they saw up on the mountaintop. yeah, I like that. See, and it just doesn't compute. We're all like Cocker Spaniels looking up and cocked head and trying to understand. But the whole point is we're trying to understand, and you can't do it that way. You can't understand it rationally, but when you experience it, then you know. And then when you hear someone with a may not be rational explanation, but one that's in words, then it starts to make sense. Like, oh, okay. Know what he's talking about. How do you know you fall in love? The songs make sense. That's it. That's how it works. But reading something like this, I mean, he's working so hard here, Merton, to try to articulate the difference between the two. Remember when he said in his introduction to the wisdom of the desert, where he said that those who went out into the desert for any other reason than to just simply be in pure silence went mad. Their bones were whitening in the sun. He used that imagery there. This is what he's talking about. If you go out to try to become a contemplative in any kind of way that has an agenda, that you're going to create yourself this contemplative identity, you're going to go crazy out there. It's going to drive you nuts. And even if you're doing it in your own bedroom, you just are banging your head against the wall. I know, because that's what I was trying to do for several years. I was trying to be Thomas Merton. I wanted to be Thomas Merton, and you can't do it, But when you just relax and you just show up and you don't think about it anymore, you don't put a time frame on it. You're not measuring your progress. then things start to happen. But it takes a while. Took me longer because I didn't have anybody telling me this stuff except Thomas Merton, people I was reading in books. And the only people that were talking to me were telling me, don't read these books. Don't listen to these people. So. Any other thoughts about any of this stuff?
It takes a long time to get it.
It doesn't have to. It's going to take some time. But to the extent that you are willing to let go, to sell everything that you think you own and just follow, then your progress can be a lot quicker. But your resistance, even unconscious resistance to this letting go of your egoic center, because that's really what it comes down to. It's the fear of letting go of what you think you know and who you think you are. That really is the block that will keep you from this. I don't know if this is going to make any sense to you. I had a friend who was talking to me today. We do this Marco Polo thing, so he sent me a Marco Polo video, if you're familiar with that, what that is. And so I was listening to it, and what he was talking about, he was saying he's in psychotherapy right now, and the therapist was trying to tell him about how psychotherapy can allow you to find the splinter in your hand that is causing all the problems. You know that there's a problem there, but you can't see it, you can't find it. The callus is formed over the splinter, but it's in there. But psychotherapy can get down and help you find the splinter. And he said, yeah, I think you've told me you're more of a CBT guy, more of a cognitive behavioral guy. And so I don't know. He says, but there's 3 movies, and he said Ordinary People and Good Will Hunting and The Prince of Tides. He named 3 movies that had to do with someone really having that epiphany of finding the splinter in their hand, and they were able to change. And I've never seen any of those 3 of those movies, so I didn't know what he's talking about. So he was asking me if there was a movie that would in such a clear and succinct way describe the CBT process of how that works. And first of all, I had to tell him I'm not a CBT person. There's a balance between the two. We need to both find the splinter, but then you got to do some work to get it out. Obviously you can't just know it's there and expect everything to change. But I said, if you had a movie that was trying to succinctly describe the CBT process or the contemplative process, that would be like watching grass grow and paint dry. How would you do a movie about that? Nothing would be happening really that you would see, because it's a slow process of showing up to a new way of looking at life, new thought processes, new behavior processes, being aware of where you're triggered and where you normally go. And so it's just this slow, steady, it's the gardener and the farmer again, just showing up day after day and doing the boring, mundane work that eventually amounts to everything. But it's not sexy, it doesn't look miraculous. And so I said, I don't know of any movie that would depict that, and I can't imagine really making one, but that's it. It's just this slow and steady showing up. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And the imagery in the Aramaic there points again, not to someone who just rides in on the white horse and breaks up the conflict, breaks up the fight and restores the peace. That's not a peacemaker in this sense. Again, it's the image of the farmer, dedicated to the process of shalom, creating the greatest amount of health and wealth and prosperity and connection and relationship, and by showing up every day and just slowly dedicated to the process, just doing what they do in favor of that peace. That is always the imagery that Jesus is using. It's not the violent, penetrative act of the warrior. It's always the slow, steady patience of the gardener or the farmer. And that's what contemplation is like. It's just slowly showing up. Well, we are at another section. I think it's probably better to go ahead and leave that next section for next week, to start there, rather than jump in for a paragraph or 2. So any thoughts about the first the first of his 3 disciplines. The prayer of the heart is nurtured by short, simple prayers, and eventually by no words at all in the contemplative practice. Then we'll talk about unceasing, and then we'll talk about the 3rd one. Any other thoughts along those lines? I know I did most of the talking tonight. Sorry about that. Patricia, no thoughts about that?
Well, what I was thinking was, Dave, thank you for your journey. And thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
Ah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you're still with us, Patricia. I was mostly just checking to see if you're listening.
Yes, I'm here.
How's your back, dear? How's your back? Is it
Good.
bad?
Good.
It's
Good.
okay?
Yes.
But you're lying down now, aren't you?
Yes.
I knew that.
Good.
I knew that about you. Okay. Very cool. William,
And
any last thoughts? Come on, man.
Did you say over soul? Like over soul when you were talking?
It's one word, over, OVERSOUL. And that's that.
Mm. And William Blake, like what should we be looking at for William Blake specifically here?
You know what? I'd stay away from the opium dreams as much as you can. Because he gets out there. But just
I'm definitely gonna read that. I'm sorry.
I can't even think of a title right now. Brady, can you think of a title that you would recommend?
I can't. The last
can't
time I
either.
wanted to kind of reacquaint myself with Blake, I just got Google and just Googled famous quotes, William Blake,
Mhm.
Okay.
and read through, there were like 30 or 40, very quotable.
But also, William, I'd say, just get online and just look for William Blake poetry. And, some of the famous ones are going to pop up on a Google search. And I mean, it's all public domain now. He was a 19th century British poet. So, there'll be stuff online that you can just glean and just take a look. It's amazing stuff, really amazing stuff. I haven't visited it in about 20 years, 15 years, maybe. I'll have to, like you, I want to go back, and now that I brought him up, let's go back and read some more of it. Because it'll be amazing how it's going to check these boxes of people who are trying to express and articulate this experience. I mean, it's like Patricia and Brady trying to articulate their death experiences. I mean, when you've had an experience like that is non-rational, how do you articulate it? How do you express it? And we all have the same difficulty, and we all end up, trying to do it in the ways that we do. Just a little, the next section of this was an example from Zen, where Merton is going in this particular book. And the last decade of his life, he was trying to find a bridge between Eastern and Western monasticism and Eastern and Western contemplative practice. And it was all there. But he said they do approach it in very different ways. The West typically approaches it in much more even erotic and emotional language to try to express that deep, intimate connection that occurs in these contemplative and mystical experiences. Whereas Zen is very dry. It's very non-emotional and kind of even a kind of indifference to the connection. And so it's interesting that the East and West approaches it differently, but they're saying exactly the same thing. It's the same experience that humans are able to have, but through the lens of the culture. So it's just fascinating. But you'll see more and more of the similarities as you read more and more, and as you practice contemplation yourself and have the experience. And then you go back and read the Gospels, and it's just there in spades, not only with Jesus, but also with the evangelists, with Paul. You see the mystical practice and contemplative spirit there as well. That's our heritage. That's who we are, and thank God, at least for the Catholic Church, carrying the torch for 2,000 years and not letting go of the contemplative banner, because the reformers certainly did. They took off in a very intellectual bent 500 years ago. And so we are really heirs to the Protestant tradition here in this country. And so, and then after the Enlightenment and everything in terms of modern science, and we've really left the building. So it's very jarring for us to try to come back. Okay. Anything else? You got 30 seconds. Say something profound in 30 seconds.
I'm wondering why I never heard about this in the church that I was raised in.
Because you were raised in the Presbyterian church, weren't you?
Yeah.
All right, there you go.
Okay.
Case closed. It's Calvin. Calvin is coming from a very different place than contemplative.
Hardly anything there. For me anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and Scott, can you close us in prayer, my friend?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Father God, thank you for this information and the knowledge and the wisdom to use the knowledge that you're giving us. Thank you for the decisions you made about how you felt about us and how you feel about us. Gives us the hope that we need to get through each day and plan for our future, because we trust you're going to be there wherever we end up. Thanks for loving us. It's in your son's mighty and precious name that we pray, and we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, buddy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Another great evening.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
See you on Sunday, one way
Bye,
or another.
Becky.
Bye,
Thank you
Georgiana.
all. Really
Night,
good to see you,
everybody.
Becky.
Good
Bye,
to see
You
you.
too,
Patricia.
Patricia. Hope you feel okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Good night.
Guys.
Thank you.
Good night, Scott. Good night, Jordana. Good night, Linda. And we have no Sherry tonight. Where was Sherry tonight?
I don't know, and I don't know. She might not be doing too good. I don't know. She's been acting kind of strange the last time I saw her, so I'm not sure if something's going on or if she's just like busy all the time now or something. I don't know. She was acting really strange the last time I talked to her. Or
Yeah,
last
she
time
got
I
a
saw her.
shingles shot yesterday.
It's probably why she's not feeling too
Oh, a
good.
shingles shot. Is that what you said, John?
Yeah, she got
Yeah.
her second shot yesterday. Her arm was
Ooh.
not feeling good this morning, and she started not to do much of anything. So my assumption is it's shingles related.
Okay. Okay. That's a good excuse. We absolve her for that. Absolutely. Thanks, John.
I'll see you Sunday, Dave, and I'll
Sunday,
see you
Sunday.
Sunday, Linda.
Okay.
See you
See you all
then.
Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you.